He sat alone, just trying to drink his coffee. An old soldier with one leg and a lifetime of silence. Then the bikers came, loud, mocking, cruel. They laughed at his prosthetic, called him a fraud. The manager asked him to leave, so he did. Quietly, with what little dignity he had left. But moments later, 7 soldiers walked in. And what they did next turned that diner into holy ground. If you believe respect is earned in silence, type "respect" in the comments. The bell over the door gave a soft jingle that barely turned heads. It was the kind of sound the regulars at Rusty Jack's Grill had learned to tune out, just part of the Saturday morning rhythm, like the clatter of forks on ceramic or the slow twang of country music leaking from the jukebox in the corner. But if anyone had looked up, really looked, they might have noticed something different about the man who stepped in. Retired Staff Sergeant Eli Ramsey walked with a slight limp, more mechanical than painful, the result of a prosthetic where his right leg used to be. He moved slowly but deliberately, like every step was measured not for attention but for balance. His jacket was worn olive drab, sun-faded and threadbare at the seams, the fabric around the elbows thinning from years of quiet use. A single patch remained on the front, 82nd Airborne, the stitching frayed but still proud. He didn't wear medals, no pins or decals or bumper sticker bravado. Just that patch and the silence that came with it. Eli didn't wait to be seated. He never did. He made his way to the booth in the farthest corner, the one near the window where the sun warmed the tabletop by 8 o'clock a.m., and the view pointed toward the hills rather than the highway. He slid in with the familiarity of someone who'd been sitting in that spot long before anyone working there today had even been born. The waitress, Marcy, a college kid home for the summer, brought him as usual without being asked. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He gave her a quiet nod, the kind that meant thank you, the kind that didn't require small talk. He wrapped both hands around the mug, not because it was cold, but because it helped keep them from trembling when the memories crept in too close. Outside, traffic passed in lazy waves. Inside, life hummed along. Kids arguing over pancakes, retirees retelling old fishing stories, and the kitchen shouting orders over sizzling bacon. But Eli didn't take part. He watched, listened, existed, quietly, like always. Because some men don't come home to be noticed. They come home to remember. The sound came first, low and guttural, like thunder that had decided to settle in for breakfast. 4 bikes pulled into the gravel lot outside Rusty Jack's, kicking up dust and commanding attention without asking for it. Engines idled a moment longer than necessary, as if to make sure everyone inside knew they'd arrived. Then silence, followed by the heavy thud of boots hitting pavement. They walked in like a storm front, leather vests patched with emblems only they understood, bandanas tight around sun-leathered skin, sunglasses still on despite the indoor light. Laughter trailed behind them, loud and unfiltered, the kind that made conversations at nearby tables pause mid-sentence. A few regulars looked up, eyes flicking toward the door, curious, cautious, before quickly returning to their plates like nothing had happened. The leader, or maybe just the loudest of them, had a walk that wasn't quite a strut but not far from it. He cracked a joke about the coffee before even sitting down. The others chuckled, not because it was funny, but because they were supposed to. They slid into the booth dead center of the diner like it had been reserved for them, all elbows and bravado, the kind of presence that shifted the energy in the room without saying a word. Marcy approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, menus in hand. "Morning, folks? Coffee?" One of them waved her off with a grin too wide to be friendly. "Nah, sweetheart, we'll just look around a bit first." They didn't have to say what they were looking at. Eli hadn't moved. Still in the corner, still with both hands around his mug, but their eyes were on him now. The prosthetic, the jacket, the silence. The leader leaned in toward his buddies, motioning toward Eli with a tilt of his chin. His voice wasn't loud, but it was meant to carry. "Look at that, old war hero, huh?" The others snorted. One muttered, "More like old fraud. Bet he just wants the vet discount." Another probably bought that leg at a surplus store. They laughed again, louder this time, and the sound cracked through the quiet hum of the diner like a thrown bottle. Eli didn't react. Not a twitch, not a word. He just looked out the window, past them all, to a place only he could see. And the rest of the diner, it stayed quiet, too quiet. The words dropped like gravel in a glass jar. Sharp, jarring, impossible to ignore. "Looks like someone left the war early," the biggest one said, jerking his thumb toward Eli's leg. His voice was soaked in arrogance, a lazy drawl laced with just enough cruelty to make sure it landed. The others didn't miss a beat. They laughed, short, barked bursts that cut through the low murmur of morning conversation. A man at the counter stiffened, but said nothing. A woman in a sun hat glanced toward Eli, then away just as quickly. Nobody made eye contact. That's how these things worked in places like Rusty Jack's. Folks didn't want trouble, even when it pulled up on a Harley and put its feet on the table. "You sure that's even real?" another biker added, eyes scanning Eli like he was a bad joke. "Bet he just slapped that thing on for the discount. Hell, I could fake a limp and get free pancakes, too." More laughter. A spoon clinked nervously against a coffee mug. The waitress, Marcy, stood behind the counter, fists clenched around her notepad, unsure whether to step in or pretend she didn't hear. They weren't being careless. They were being deliberate. This wasn't barroom trash talk. This was a performance, designed to provoke, to diminish, to see if the old man in the corner would break. But Eli didn't. He didn't flinch, didn't scowl, didn't even look their way. He just raised his cup with the same steady grace he always had, took a sip, and returned it to the saucer. A breath in, a breath out. Like it didn't matter. Like he'd already lived through far worse than a few loudmouths playing tough over diner eggs. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was weight. Heavy, humming, impossible to lift. Outside, a breeze tugged at the American flag hanging from the post by the parking lot. Inside, you could feel the air change, the temperature of the room cooling, the tension thickening. The bikers didn't notice. They were still grinning, still full of themselves. But something was shifting. You could feel it, the way you feel thunder before it hits. Carl came out from behind the counter like a man walking into wind, shoulders stiff, face set in that nervous smile people wear when they're about to do something they already know is wrong. Clipboard in one hand, apron too clean for someone who'd spent a morning managing chaos. He moved past the booths, past the coffee station, his steps a little too quick, like he wanted this over before anyone could ask him to explain. He stopped at Eli's table, cleared his throat. "Sir," he began, his voice just above a whisper, we're trying to maintain a friendly atmosphere this morning. Some of the guests have expressed discomfort. Maybe you'd be more comfortable sitting outside." He said it like he was offering a gift, like exile was a favor. Eli looked up at him, eyes steady, face unreadable. He didn't argue, didn't ask who complained. He just stared at Carl for a long second. Not angry, not surprised. Just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from walking on a prosthetic leg, but from carrying the same conversation through decades of polite dismissals and masked contempt. Then, without a word, he set down his coffee, reached for his cane, and stood. It took effort. Not because he was weak, because the act of rising in silence with dignity intact always takes more strength than shouting ever could. He picked up his plate with his free hand and gave a small nod. Nod of agreement, of acceptance. The nod of a man who's been asked to leave more places than he's been welcomed. As he turned towards the door, his cane tapping quietly against the floor, one of the bikers chuckled. Guess he knows when he's not wanted. Laughter rippled through their table again, louder now, emboldened. No one else in the diner said a word. Not Marcy, not the couple near the window, not the teenage busboy who paused mid-swipe with a dishcloth. They all heard, they all looked, and then they all looked away. Eli reached the door, leaned into the push bar with one shoulder, and stepped outside into the crisp light of late morning. The bell jingled again behind him, soft, indifferent. And just like that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him with the soft finality of something more than just a door. Eli stepped into the chill like he'd expected it, like he'd been waiting for it. The wind had picked up. It tugged gently at the hem of his jacket and pushed dry leaves in slow spirals around his boots, scuffed and dulled from years of honest use. He moved to the metal table near the edge of the patio, the one farthest from the door, from the noise, from the people who'd rather not look at men like him. The chair screeched softly as he pulled it back. He sat down slowly, careful with the leg, the kind of care that isn't about pain, but about balance, between dignity and fatigue, between pride and silence. His coffee sat cooling on the saucer. He didn't reach for it, just stared out past the road, toward the tree line where rust-colored leaves clung stubbornly to autumn branches. He watched them the way soldiers watch the horizon, calm, cautious, as if expecting something they wouldn't say out loud. Inside the diner, life didn't stop, but it shifted. Conversations resumed, but they were slower, more careful. The waitress poured refills without her usual smile. A man at the counter picked at his toast like he couldn't remember ordering it. The bikers were still laughing, but it had thinned, like they were waiting for someone to join in, and no one did. No one looked outside. Because looking meant admitting you saw what just happened, and seeing it meant doing something. So they didn't. They just stirred sugar into coffee cups and pushed eggs around plates, pretending silence was the same as peace. Carl retreated to the kitchen. Marcy stood frozen behind the register, twisting the ring on her finger, eyes flicking between the patio and the center booth. She didn't say a word. She just watched the wind tease the corners of Eli's napkin. Out by the curb, Eli sat still. His hands rested on the table, fingers curled slightly, like they were waiting to hold something that never came. He didn't look angry. He didn't look hurt. He just looked like a man who'd been here before. And that's what made it worse. The clock over the counter ticked past 9:12. No one noticed, or pretended not to. Forks scraped plates. A spoon clinked against a ceramic mug. A cough in the corner. The usual Saturday morning sounds returned, but hollow now, like background noise in a room that had already lost something. And then the bell over the door rang again. It wasn't loud, just that soft chime, almost delicate, but something in it made heads turn. First one, then another. The room seemed to pause without meaning to. 2 soldiers stepped in. Active duty, not retirees. Uniforms pressed, boots polished, the kind of presence you don't teach, you earn. They didn't glance around, didn't look for menus, didn't even blink at the bikers, who froze mid-laugh, their bravado suddenly wilting under the weight of something they couldn't name. Then came another soldier. Then 2 more, 7 in total. Men and women. No noise but the rhythmic, purposeful sound of boots on tile. A quiet cadence that filled the room without saying a word. They didn't speak to Carl. They didn't ask Marcy for coffee. They didn't nod or explain. They just walked. Through the silence, through the tension, through the place where judgment had sat only moments ago, and straight out the glass door, past the booths, past the laughter, past the shame. Outside, Eli was still at the patio table, hands resting on the cooling metal, eyes on the road. He didn't hear them at first, but then he noticed the change in air pressure, the faint scuff of boots against concrete. He looked up slowly, and they were there. 7 of them standing behind him, not blocking him, not surrounding him. Standing with him, not in protest, in honor. Spine straight, hands clasped behind backs, eyes forward, unwavering. Like the wall he'd stood behind so many times before had returned, just when he needed it most. Eli blinked, once, twice. The wind caught the corner of his napkin and flapped it gently in the breeze. He turned back to his coffee. No words, no reaction. But something in his shoulders lifted, not because he wasn't alone, because he had never really been. The sound of the breeze swirled through the patio, rustling napkins and brushing through the trees like it knew something sacred was happening and wanted to bear witness. Eli sat still, eyes lowered, until the boots shifted beside him. One soldier stepped forward. He was young, but not green. There was something carved into his stance, something earned. His name tag read Nguyen, and the bars on his chest were clean, simple, sharp. He stood directly in front of Eli, brought his heels together and raised a crisp salute that cut through the air like a blade. "Sir," he said, voice steady and clear, "permission to sit with you." Eli didn't answer right away. His gaze rose slowly, as if it took effort not from age, but from the sheer weight of being seen. His eyes, lined with the years most people never ask about, flickered with something unspoken. Recognition. Pain. Pride. Maybe all 3. He nodded. Just once. And that was enough. David Nguyen turned. Not to sit just yet, but to face the glass window of the diner. His reflection stood beside Eli's, young and old, shoulder to shoulder. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "That man," he said, nodding toward Eli, "lost his leg saving my brother's unit in Kandahar. 3 of them are alive today because of him." Inside, forks froze. Coffee cups hovered mid-air. Carl stopped mid-step near the register, his mouth half open like he'd forgotten how to swallow. David's tone sharpened, not angry, clear, grounded. "You don't send a man like that outside," he said. "You send gratitude." No one moved at first. The bikers had gone pale, eyes darting anywhere but forward. One reached for his wallet like it might make him invisible. Another shifted in his seat like the booth had become too small to hold him. The silence didn't break. It changed, it deepened, thickened, became something heavier than shame. And then, slowly, the room stirred. A woman near the door rose to her feet. A young man at the counter set down his phone and stood. Quiet, reverent, not for show, but because something real had walked in and stood tall. And now, no one could pretend they hadn't seen it. Outside, David took the seat across from Eli. Still stiff, still respectful. Eli didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Some men speak with silence. Others just wait for the world to listen. Inside the diner, the silence had turned to heat, thick and suffocating, like the kind that builds before a thunderstorm but never quite breaks. The bikers sat still, hunched now, their earlier swagger bleeding out like air from a tire. The one with the loud mouth fidgeted, tapping the side of his mug with a coin that clicked nervously against the ceramic. "I didn't know." He muttered to no one in particular, eyes locked on his half-eaten plate. How were we supposed to know? But no one answered him. No one needed to. The question wasn't for anyone else. It was for his own conscience, and even that wasn't buying it. Another biker stood up too fast, knocking his knee into the edge of the table. He flinched, grabbed a few bills from his wallet, and dropped them onto the check with more force than necessary. Then, without a word, he walked out. His boots hit the floor harder than they needed to, like he wanted people to hear him leaving. By the time the last of the 7 soldiers had taken a seat around Eli, boots neatly aligned, eyes straight ahead, the table in the center of the diner was empty. 4 chairs, 4 untouched coffees. 4 men who'd come in loud and left smaller than they'd ever expected. Out on the patio, the world had slowed. Eli sat in the same position, hands wrapped around his coffee cup, still warm enough to matter. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't looked at the door. He didn't need to. Carl, the manager, stepped out quietly. No clipboard this time. No fake smile. Just pale skin and trembling lips. He walked up to the table like a man headed to a confession. "I'm sorry, sir," he said softly, barely louder than the wind. Eli didn't look up. He didn't nod. He didn't scold. He just reached toward the small plastic container of creamer, popped the lid, and poured it gently into his coffee. He stirred it with slow, deliberate circles, the spoon clinking once against the edge of the mug. Then, for the first time all morning, he picked up his fork, took a bite of his eggs. Warm or not, they were his, and he ate them in silence, surrounded by the quietest kind of honor. Earned, not demanded. Amy stood just behind the dish pit, a towel slung over her shoulder, suds still drying on her arms. She wasn't supposed to have her phone out, but the moment had stilled her hands. She watched through the half-open door to the patio, the old man in the olive jacket, steam rising gently from his mug, 7 soldiers seated like sentinels around him. No one was speaking, no one needed to. The sky had begun to shift, clouds parting just enough to let a beam of sun fall across the table like someone upstairs was paying attention. She raised her phone, almost afraid to break the silence. Framed it. Clicked once. No filter, no flash. Just truth. Later, during her break, she posted it with 5 words. Not a caption, a reminder. "This is how you salute." She didn't expect anything, a few likes, maybe a comment from her cousin. But by the time she clocked out an hour later, her phone buzzed with hundreds of notifications. Comments, shares, messages from people she didn't know, some from nearby, some from halfway across the country. By nightfall, the number hit 2 million. Veterans reposted it. Gold Star families added memories. Soldiers commented with stories that started with, "I don't know him, but I've met men like him." A retired general from Fort Bragg shared it with the line, "Respect isn't loud, it stands quietly." The town woke up on Sunday to something strange. Recognition. Strangers passed through just to see the table. A group of bikers, not the ones from yesterday, left a folded flag on the patio. A florist dropped off a bouquet with a handwritten note. You were seen. You mattered. By Monday morning, a black SUV with government plates pulled up outside Rusty Jack's. 2 men in VA-issued jackets stepped out and asked to speak to Eli. They didn't bring paperwork. Just their presence, their silence, and a folded envelope with an apology tucked between formal letters that should have been written decades ago. Eli read none of it. He just looked up, blinked slowly, and said, "Tell whoever sent you, thank you." And that was all, but the town had already changed. The plaque showed up on a Thursday. No ribbon cutting, no speech, no press. Just a quiet handyman in a flannel shirt kneeling beside the patio table. carefully drilling 4 screws into a brass plate that caught the morning light just right. It read simply, "Reserved for those who served." No fanfare, just respect, etched in metal. By the end of the week, the town council held a vote, unanimous. A little stretch of grass behind the library, once overlooked and overgrown, would be cleaned up, benches added, and named Ramsey Field. No statues, just a single oak tree and a wooden sign. A place to sit, to breathe, to remember. Eli never asked for any of it. When they told him about the plaque, he nodded once and said, "Hope they bolted it down good. Wind gets tricky out there." When the mayor told him about the park, he just said, "Didn't think they knew my name." But every Saturday, he kept showing up. Same booth, same coffee, same quiet nod to Marcy when she poured his cup before he even sat down. Some things didn't change. Except now, he never sat alone. Every week, someone new would slide into the seat across from him. A young Marine on leave, a retired nurse from Desert Storm, a National Guardsman in civilian clothes, trying to say thank you without saying too much. They didn't talk about war. They didn't need to. They talked about engines, baseball, weather patterns over Kandahar, the kinds of things only people who've been through it understand carry more than just surface meaning. And the rest of the diner? They noticed. Even the boldest bikers, new ones passing through, took one look at the brass plaque and the soldiers beside Eli and chose their words carefully. Some nodded. Some stayed quiet. But no one dared to laugh, because the story had already been written into the walls of that place, into the coffee mugs and cornered tables, into the flag that now hung just a little straighter outside the front door. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's memory. It's dignity waiting for the right moment to be heard. And when that moment comes, it echoes.